Colin Kaepernick settles with the NFL, the social justice sports warriors claim victory, and I'm over here wondering why anyone takes this guy seriously. What's up, world? I'm Andrew Coppins, and you found After the Numbers, where facts, figures, numbers, and language guide us through some of the biggest stories around. Today, we take on the fallacy of Colin Kaepernick, the great martyr of the 21st century. No subject in the world of sports is more contentious than that of Colin Kaepernick, and just over a week ago, he settled with the NFL rather than go to trial over his allegations that the league's owners colluded to keep him away. For the league, it avoided having to reveal private communications of all sorts and the headache of being in the headlines for all the wrong reasons, even if they had a case to win. For Kaepernick, it was a payday and vindication, at least if you read the mainstream media. It was apparently a monetarily successful endeavor, allowing Eric Reid and himself to split an alleged $60 to $80 million. That's certainly a huge sum of money and puts to bed an ugly part of NFL history, no matter if you agree with or dismiss Kaepernick and the protests he sparked in 2016 and beyond. Leftist sports media, whom I call the social justice sports warriors, or SJSWs for short, celebrated like it was New Year's Eve and 4th of July all at once. The only thing that seemed to be missing was a full-blown fireworks extravaganza outside of Kaepernick's home. Take, for instance, former ESPN talking head turned writer for The Atlantic, Jemele Hill, for example. She wrote a celebratory article and has been one of the most vocal SJSWs supporting Kaepernick to date. To her, this was all about Kaepernick getting over on a league she believes screwed him over, with this quote: "That Kaepernick was the one to make the NFL eat crow is a special kind of karma. This is just punishment because the league incompetently handled the players' protests, starting with Kaepernick from the beginning. Had the league not been so heavy-handed in policing the protests, this issue likely would have been abated sooner. Had the league ignored Trump instead of cowering to his bullying, appeasing Trump wouldn't have become a priority. Had one league owner had the guts to sign Kaepernick, this collusion case would have been a non-starter." That's all well and good, but there's just one rather large problem. All of what Hill had to say doesn't mesh with the actual facts of what happened. Let's start with the reality of the "had the league not been so heavy-handed, this issue would have been abated sooner" line. That's just simply false on its face, because viewership numbers over the last 2 seasons and multiple fan polls show a large amount of people didn't support the protests at all. Instead, viewership declined steadily in 2016 and 2017 before making a sort of recovery in 2018. This is something I covered in depth in a By the Numbers segment last month, and you can find the link below. But what you need to know is there was a whopping 9.7% decrease in viewership in 2017, and that came after an 8% decline in 2016 as well. It's also no coincidence that the coverage of player protests stopped in 2018 and eyeballs on games went up. It's also no coincidence that the SJSWs, spending every waking second talking protest and politics over X's and O's, began to drive away fans in droves. Beyond that, I have a very simple question for those treating Kaepernick as some sort of a martyr. What would have been the correct response from the NFL to protests like this? Let's remember, Hill suggested there was a heavy-handed response by the league. The reality is, the NFL did the exact opposite of what Hill is suggesting. It was their inability to make a decision, stick with it, and enforce it. Whatever that decision was, that got them into major trouble and led to said declining ratings and distrust across the board. It's also pretty ironic that the protest thing only went away because the bottom line of leftist media organizations began to be affected. You see, declining ratings mean declining advertising buy rates, and that means less money recruit for the massive spending ESPN, CBS, and NBC did to gain said TV rights. According to reports, the NFL TV partners lost upwards of $500 million in revenue between 2017 and 2018, thanks to lower ratings driving lower ad rates. Once that happened, we magically heard or saw nothing of the player protests anymore. Later on in Hill's piece, she states that, quote, "I still doubt that Kaepernick will ever play in the NFL again, but the point of suing the NFL wasn't necessarily about resuming his football career." She isn't totally wrong here, because I firmly believe that Kaepernick has never been about playing football for the love of the game. I firmly believe he sees football as a money-making endeavor and a launching point to other things. There's nothing wrong with that, but Kaepernick is the one going around claiming he still loves the game. The evidence contradicts that in so many ways. If he was serious about trying to get back into the game, then why turn down the offer to play in the Alliance of American Football this year? Yes, that's right, folks. Kaepernick turned down an offer to play football. and did so while demanding the brand new league pay him $20 million for a 10-game season. That's a very unserious demand for someone that claims to want to be back on the field. Just think about this for a second. The entire payroll for players in the alliance is $28 million, yet you go ahead and demand $20 million for yourself? I'm all for trying to maximize your personal income, but that was a very unserious counter to an offer to play football once again. Just because you value yourself at XYZ doesn't mean the market has to. Furthermore, let's talk about what you do for a profession you are passionate about. Sometimes you humble up, knowing you're worth more than what the market is paying right now, do the job you supposedly love to do for less than you believe you're worth in the short term, and watch your value grow again with quality performances. Kaepernick has done none of that, including while in the NFL. In fact, I dare say he'd likely still be in the league if he had any sense of the market over his inflated sense of worth. Let's remember, Kaepernick is the one who chose to play out his contract, decline a sign-and-trade deal with the Denver Broncos, and bet that he'd be a valued commodity after the 2016 season. That's not how that worked out at all. Instead, Kaepernick stumbled to a 1-10 record as a starter, and the market dried up for him. Yes, his off-the-field protest likely had something to do with teams shying away, but that's part of the puzzle, just like anyone else's personality or personal life would be taken into consideration. That's not persecution and collusion per se. That's a simple cost-benefits analysis any good business does. We also have plenty of evidence of a league full of players who get second chances for far worse actions, but those players often do so with less financial risk for the team. Kaepernick wasn't going to do that. He was all about his money. That's fine, and it's his prerogative. Here's the harsh reality. Kaepernick gambled and lost, and then decided to throw a hissy fit because he wasn't going to get paid what he believed his value was. Sorry, that's not how life works. As for the protests, it brought him more notoriety than anything he did on the football field by that point in time. By the time he began protesting, Kaepernick was long removed from leading the 49ers to a Super Bowl, to say the least. Furthering the fallacy of Kaepernick also means examining his protest to begin with. So I want to take you into the way back machine, all the way back to his first public speech on his protest following a 2016 preseason game between the 49ers and the Green Bay Packers. Why? It's important to understand what Kaepernick actually stated in his own words as the reason for his protest. A lot has gotten lost in translation over the past 2+ years, so let's take a look at his full quote following that game. "I'm not going to stand up to show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses black people and people of color. To me, this is bigger than football, and it would be selfish on my part to look the other way. There are bodies in the street and people getting paid leave and getting away with murder." Again, there are bodies in the street and people getting paid leave and getting away with murder. That's Kaepernick talking about police officers in the United States of America, if you haven't already guessed it. He made that point more plainly in other conversations following this initial interaction as well. I'm not going to parse out everything Kaepernick had to say in that 2016 statement, because it's been done ad nauseum in the 2+ years since that time. But I do want to point out two things. Where was the media to hold Kaepernick's feet to the fire, and what do the numbers say about what he was suggesting? Mainly that black people are being murdered by police at an alarming rate and getting away with it. First off, the media was never going to hold his feet to the fire because Kaepernick is a social justice warrior just like most of them. They think the same way, so when he speaks like this, they don't think twice about what was said. It's the same thing that took place when Michael Bennett made false claims about police brutality against him in Las Vegas. The SJSW's reflex wasn't the skepticism that should be present in every journalist. It was to believe what they were saying was the gospel truth. But back to Kaepernick. If ever there was a time to ask the hard questions, it was right as he made that initial statement, while wearing a Fidel Castro and Malcolm X shirt nonetheless. If ever there was a symbol of the fallacy of Kaepernick's argument, he was wearing it. If he could talk about oppression of people of color while wearing a shirt glorifying Fidel Castro, he clearly shouldn't be taken seriously. It also should have been the first clue to those charged with asking the hard questions to do just that. But it didn't happen then and hasn't really happened since. The one time it did was when Kaepernick and the 49ers traveled to Miami to take on the Dolphins later that year. That prompted a Cuban-American reporter to challenge Kaepernick. And instead of answering the direct question about oppression of people of color by Castro, which is a well-documented fact, Kaepernick went into talking points mode. He would go on to talk about Cuban literacy rates being the best in the world, as if that had anything to do with the question at hand. along with the imprisoning of people of color in the United States as a form of slavery. You see, when pressed about his beliefs, Kaepernick has no depth to him. He spits out talking points from far, far left outlets and communist propaganda as if he's the smartest man in the room. But beyond his utter lack of historical knowledge, he also hasn't done his research into the actual facts regarding shootings involving police. If he had, it would mean he was simply lying to you and I about the situation. Here are the actual numbers of people shot and killed by police from 2017 and 2016. 1,804 overall, 51% of which were white, 25% black, 19% Hispanic, 5% other races. Yes, that 25% number is overrepresentative of the overall black population in this country, but that's an overly simplistic understanding of the circumstances that would get to this point. Instead, we also need to know that young black men between the ages of 16 to 40 make up just 6% of the population, yet account for over 50% of the murders in the US. Now, chances are, if you are involved with violent acts, you're statistically more likely to get shot at, right? However, the numbers suggest black people are less likely to be shot at on a per capita basis when you look at the criminality data. Also, if you were to believe Kaepernick, unarmed black men are being mowed down at crazy rates. That also couldn't be further from the truth. That's because a whopping 116 unarmed people were killed by police in 2016 and 17 combined. 45% of those were white, 33% black, 19% Hispanic, for your reference. Now that means 38 unarmed black people were shot and killed by police in that 2-year period. How many of them were killed by officers who weren't white? I think you see where I'm going, because we're talking about Kaepernick claiming oppression of a wide swath of people over less than 38 deaths. Never mind the other mitigating factor that not all unarmed people are not dangerous or pose a deadly risk to officers either. Unfortunately, we don't have the full numbers on that, but once you whittle it down, I think you get the point that this is pretty rare stuff. But if you still don't, try this on for size. More people died in America from bee, wasp, or hornet stings in that same 2-year span, 118, than died from police shootings of unarmed people. Sadly, more people died from being hit by a train as well. Following the fallacy of Kaepernick's argument, shouldn't we be up in arms and protesting to eliminate bees, wasps, hornets, and high-speed rail? What gets me more than anything else about Kaepernick's stance is that he has said and done literally nothing about black-on-black violence. Sadly, 93% of all murders of black people happen at the hands of other black people, and similar rates do happen across other races. But if you care most about people of color, as Kaepernick espouses, where's the real action and call for stopping of murders of anyone of that race, regardless of who commits them? For me, all of this adds up to a man who is far from the martyr the SJSWs would like you and I to believe Kaepernick to be. Instead, he's the ultimate opportunist. That may be winning in some form, but has Kaepernick really done anything to affect the situation he protested about to begin with? Nope. And that's even after ponying up $1 million of his own money to boot for charity. Don't forget to keep on supporting this channel and the effort to combat falsehoods with facts wherever they come from. You can do that by hitting that subscribe button over here and that notifications bell, since YouTube doesn't like to make finding content easy. Let's continue the thoughtful discussion in the comment section below, or join in on Twitter at The Coppin Show.